Thanks for watching Notepad. I'm your host Ibrahim Sani. Today I'm with Damien Wong of Red Hat, a company that is well renowned for its solutions in the IT sector. Damien, thanks again for taking the time to speak with us. Today the conversation is of course on open banking, and what we know of open banking is where APIs are being opened for third-party applications to build their solutions around financial services. But there's a lot of wariness coming in, there's a lot of concern.
Absolutely.
Perhaps suspicion more than anything about how open banking is going to remain secure moving forward. We've had plenty of financial scams, financial issues of, as simple as people logging in and unable to do so, or logging in using, and then you see somebody else's account. Many of these issues.
Absolutely.
How will open banking try to negate all these problems?
Sure. So first and foremost, there are a lot of benefits and advantages that will be accrued because of open banking, right? You are able to extend the bank services through third parties to consumers and make their lives a lot richer as a result of that. So as a result of the access to open APIs, obviously there are some considerations you need to take into account. Cybersecurity and the fact that potentially there's a greater surface for attacks. But it's just like the analogy of driving, right? Just because you have the prospect of getting into an accident just because you're driving doesn't mean you stop driving. You just make sure that the frameworks for which you drive, the laws, the traffic signals, etc., adherence to those, you have compliance, as well as the fact that make the cars better, smarter, and also make sure that people are trained well to drive well. So I think that's where you have to combine some of these things to make sure that open banking, with all its benefits, you also have to consider and mitigate any of the risks that come with that. Right?
Of course, the payoff has to be there. Whether or not regulators might be able to allow this to happen. For instance, in Malaysia, Negara is very strict, and rightfully so, by the way. They're very strict in terms of allowing new technologies to come in. And of course, with this heavy regulated industry, you're going to see things moving a little bit slower than what can happen. It's not Silicon Valley, it's still this kind of closed down regulatory framework. How do you think regulators can bridge that kind of concern of protecting people's privacy and security versus trying to be out there and innovate and be as competitive as ever?
Well, it's a great question. First and foremost, it's a lot of what many people are thinking about today, right? So on the one hand, you have the need to drive innovation. And on the other hand, you need to make sure there's protection for consumers. But I think that actually regulation is a good thing because it places a framework and boundaries on where the innovation can go and should go. I think of it like brakes in your cars, right? If you don't have brakes in your cars, actually it prevents you from going very fast because you don't know when and where you might need to stop. So you go slower as a result of that. So I think good regulatory frameworks are like good brakes in a car. You know that when you need it, you can actually apply the brakes and stop. So regulators have to take into account that some regulation, some light touch regulation is required, and continue to iterate as they uncover, right, what the best practices are. So it's about working with enterprise players like ourselves who are working with numerous financial institutions and non-bank institutions across the world, as well as with other regulators to see what they have done and apply those learnings to Malaysia. I think that Malaysia is in a good place because obviously we have a lot of innovation going on, but at the same time we have regulators who are cognizant of the need to let innovation take place. So it's always good to have regulators who want to move forward but are allowing the innovation to proceed at a measured pace.
Let's look at some of the case use scenario that is currently happening right now in Malaysia. I believe that some banks are being rolling out in terms of the open third-party APIs. Do you have any more insight into the kind of real use case that is currently being happening in Malaysia for open banking?
So there's a lot of use cases, and it's mainly related to how can these applications of the APIs benefit the end user or consumers, because it's all about making it seamless. So I don't, for example, plan for a holiday and think about how I'm going to, perhaps finance it. I don't think about, how I'm going to save for it. I don't think about how I might be able to buy some travel insurance that goes with it and so on and so forth. So I don't go to each of those suppliers of financial services to do those transactions when I'm planning my holiday, or at least I don't want to. But if you can have someone who is able to then bring it all together, permission-based, obviously, right? I must give permission to the providers, and so that they can get access to that information and allow me to have a seamless experience. Or similarly, information that is being collected about me that can be applied to make my life, quality of life a lot better, right? And this is where APIs actually are very, very useful for those who want it. So I think the question is, we have to allow people who want it to have access to it, as long as they are educated on the risk of providing that access to third parties, right? And I think the framework allows people to know who can be trusted and who cannot be trusted.
Open APIs have been around for the longest of time.
Absolutely.
But the problem, well, no, I guess not the problem. The challenge here is to extend it to now our bank accounts. That's where the bridge needs to be crossed.
Sure.
APIs with our, any other technology that we have, from open browsers to even mobile phone apps, all that has already been allowed or permitted to be used by us, the user. But financial services is a whole other ambit altogether. In fact, the recent survey done by Bank Negara was also asking how cash accounts are still being treated as different from, say, credit cards, which they believe is still an appendix towards the cash account. Cash account is literally the pot of gold that we are talking about. How do you think that that kind of momentum in terms of psychological shift can move from whatever that we have right now with open APIs into our bank accounts?
Well, it's a great question again, right? If you think about it, we are moving money around. We are moving, we're changing financial transactions from physical to digital, and then now through third parties that are non-regulated entities per se. So I think when you come into that kind of a situation, then it's of course a little bit more concerning, because who do you then allow to do this and who do you then not allow? So if, for example, you are someone providing a different service altogether, say ride-hailing, and then you decide that you want to provide micropayments and microcredit, etc., as part of that, right? And you want to tie up with a bank to do that. The APIs that are there, the open API framework, allows this kind of collaboration to happen. Now, obviously as consumers, we need to be aware that if we give permission to others to access that information, to debit or credit our savings or current accounts, etc., then we need to understand that there are some inherent risks tied to that. So I think that as long as, just as in any kind of framework, as long as you're aware what the risks are, and you continue to be mindful of the risk and follow the logical things that you need to do, right? Then actually it's not that bad. It's like crossing the road, when the light turns green, you cross the road, right? But if you're going to insist on crossing when the light turns red, then you're inviting issues to happen. So I think it's all about changing the perceptions and the way things work across everyone as the digital way of life becomes the norm, right?
All right. Okay, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss more with Damien Wong of Red Hat. Thanks for staying on with us. You are watching Notepad. I'm with Damien Wong of Red Hat. Damien, you've had plenty of experience in terms of rolling out open banking solutions with some of your clients. Let's talk a little bit about the story of Red Hat. How have you impacted the industry with your work via your clients on open banking?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'd love to talk a little bit about that. So obviously there's the technology aspects, right? Open banking is about APIs, and first and foremost you have to ensure that the bank and financial institutions have that ability to create those APIs and expose them to the right people. So that is where Red Hat actually comes into play, because we have technology that allows you to take information from the back end and expose them as APIs to third parties with a governance framework, right? So we have a technology called Fuse that allows you to take this information and create APIs. And then we have a technology called 3Scale, which is an API management gateway. So I can then now know that, party A has permission to access these APIs. And I also have the ability to monitor, measure, as well as charge if I wanted to, right, for the usage of these APIs. So the technology is obviously one of the things that is important. But over and above that, then it is about running the innovation cycles in order to ensure that you can facilitate consumption of the APIs, right? What kind of use cases do you apply to consume the APIs and provide additional services? So those kinds of services, the change of culture to one which is much more innovative, using DevOps to drive new capabilities that makes the lives of consumers richer or companies richer. I think all those are actually where Red Hat comes into play, because we not only provide the technology, which is open source based, but also help companies with the processes for developing these applications, as well as the changing culture, because you no longer think just like a bank or financial institution traditionally. You have to now think like a technology company, because guess what, right now you are actually creating technology offerings which you then take out through third parties, to consumers, etc. So it's a little bit of a paradigm shift that we are helping to shape in financial institutions.
So what will be the challenges in rolling this out, particularly when you see various markets, they have various regulations intact, there's different levels of economic growth for various markets, particularly in ASEAN. Do you string them all together? There's a lowest common denominator in terms of rolling out solutions, or is there a different way of rolling out solutions in different markets?
Well, that's a good perspective to have. We think that as a result of digitalization, actually this is a great equalizer per se, because if you had started off behind, right, with digital technologies you can actually leapfrog, because in the past only the biggest with the most assets were able to afford the technologies that can then give you that advantage. But today, with open source and open innovation, that access to technology has actually come down significantly. The other thing is that, if you look at this way of providing services, it actually increases financial inclusion. Why? In the past, I have to go to a bank branch or an ATM or meet somebody from the banks and the financial institutions in order for me to conduct the transaction. But today, with financial institutions going digital, there is the ability to do transactions even when you are remote, right? Even when you don't have a bank branch within 100 kilometers from your home or your farms and factories and so on and so forth. So what does that do? It promotes financial inclusion of the underbanked and unbanked. And I think that's a fantastic thing, because suddenly you have credit, you have loans, you have savings abilities when previously you didn't, right?
The challenge for Malaysia is not the underbanked and underbanked and unbanked. I mean, the unbanked, recent statistics shows about 3 to 5%. It's extremely low. Perhaps there's a reason why they don't want to be banked. It's not about reach, it's about consistency.
Of course.
And we're relying a lot on technology. Therefore, the backbone of technology right now is connectivity, 4G. That is a thing that we need to focus on. Do you think that, I mean, of course, for Thailand, Indonesia, yes, the challenge would be, or the solution that they need to solve is the underbanked and unbanked. Do you think that while all your solutions are there, they're intact, it makes sense, it's cheap to be rolled out, there's benefits, all that together, but the backbone, the infrastructure themselves needs to be worked on even better? You can't just rely on 5G, or hopefully 5G, but you can't rely on 4G LTE just, on the big towns. Malaysia is not about the big towns, it's everywhere else. How do you tally that back? The solution that you have is great, but there's nothing to carry it forward.
Absolutely. I mean, infrastructure, availability, reliability, and affordability are hygiene factors. You need them, right? If you're going to have a digital economy, you're going to have to provide that backbone, as you've mentioned. And whether it is 4G or 5G, right? And 5G promises a lot because, suddenly you're going to
I think they're over-promising. I don't think 5G is going to be
perhaps
that savior that we talk about. But never mind. That's another topic.
Well, that's another topic altogether.
Yeah.
But it is a basic requirement. You need reliable, consistent, affordable infrastructure and connectivity. Because if you don't have that, then how do you provide those kinds of services? Now, obviously, with edge computing, you're starting to have computing and intelligence on your edge devices, your mobile phones, your vehicles, and so on and so forth, so kiosks and all that. And that provides another level of service that perhaps can bridge the intermediate lack of that connectivity. But for the most part, you do need that, and it's a requirement as well as all the other frameworks and technologies that makes it secure for you to consume, right? You want to know that, hey, if I am doing business through this party, Bank Negara is, for example, saying that this party is, approved to consume or provide these services, which obviously includes financial institutions, services, and data. And I think that is where having a framework where people can come to rely on will definitely promote the use of APIs and in this case open banking. Right?
All right. Another element I want to talk about. And this is perhaps towards the end of the interview. I just want to focus on the pain that Malaysia had to go through for the past 3 or 4 years, where fraudulent activity resulting from financial transfer of cash,
Sure.
1MDB is still being debated, SRC International, many of those cases.
Sure.
Now, this is not ripping off the individual Malaysian. This is just financial fraudulent transaction that is currently being happening.
Right.
Between institutions. Do you think that with open banking, things like this can be further mitigated and further solved moving forward?
Well, I think that open banking provides you the opportunity to then apply additional information technology innovations. For example, artificial intelligence, right? If you have the ability to take streaming data from financial transactions and be able to apply a level of intelligence on it that spots irregularities or spots unusual activity and then allows you to then take actions to mitigate or address that, actually it helps because of the fact that open banking is about transparency, openness, and collaboration. And the more people are involved in this openly and transparently, the less likely that someone can just say, hey, I'm not going to show you what's happening. And, and I think that the adage, more eyes, less issues, is actually going to be very apt in this context.
What do you foresee in the near term with regard to open banking? I don't want to go, 5G and all that. Like, what's going to happen this year, next year? What's your opinion on this?
So it's, it's great because we're going into 2020 already, and I already see many customers of Red Hats actually adopting open banking initiatives. So open banking originated from Europe, right, where there was a big push for this, but it's starting to permeate across the world. And in Malaysia, I'm very happy to see that many of the financial institutions have embraced the fundamental concepts of open banking and open APIs. So many have put into place starting to put into place the foundations for that, creating that API layer, starting to work on exposing those APIs to third parties, and getting ready for when the framework is out, in the open, then obviously it allows them to leapfrog and get into this digital era. I think that is the way of the future. I'm a consumer. I'm all for this. I think it's going to be great for all of us in Malaysia as well as across the Asian region.
All right, that was my conversation with Damien Wong of Red Hat. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astro.com. Look for Notepad. Some of the interviews like this can be found there. You can also watch these interviews on the Astro AWANI app. And it is an open API, by the way, that particular app. You can download that particular application on wherever you get your application. That's it from me for this particular episode. Thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.
Thank you, my friend.